name is Stephen Reiner. I'm with the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University, and this is Science on Tap. We're here at the Stony Brook Yacht Club this evening, and my guest is Damien Chapman, who's an associate professor of marine sciences at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Science at Stony Brook. Damien, Dr. Chapman knows more about sharks than just about anyone else out of the water. And he's going to tell us tonight, and we're going to talk tonight about why so many of the extraordinary species of sharks around the world are seriously endangered by something that you might not think of as necessarily threatening, which is soup. So with that, let's start with a question: why sharks?
So in New Zealand, you grow up on the beach, so camping on the beach, and my mum actually, when she was 15, she was on the beach and a great white killed a girl in her school. So every time we would go swimming, we were always told, don't go too far because the sharks will get you. So of course, when you're a kid, oh, sharks, that's cool. You're a little afraid you won't swim out. So I just got really interested and I started reading about sharks a lot. And actually, my grandfather had a big shark tattoo on his arm. So that was another thing. I probably imprinted it on that when I was little. The more I read about them, the more I became interested in sharks. And the fear turned into fascination. So in the end, I just decided I went to school, did marine biology. They started me on studying seals, but I wanted to study what the seals got killed by. So ended up on sharks.
How many species of sharks are there?
Well, there's about 500 described species of sharks, and it's growing because as we're exploring the deep sea, we're finding new species all the time. And also, we haven't really studied sharks that much, especially at the genetic level, and when we look at their DNA, all of a sudden we find actually what we thought was one species was 2, 3, 4, 5 species sometimes.
So with 500 species of sharks, are they plentiful around the world?
Well, they used to be. I mean, sharks are the main sort of upper level predators. They have been like that for 400 million years. So the ocean used to be very much full of sharks, but now not so much.
Why is it important for the upper level predators to have a healthy population?
Well, it's something, if you think about the top predators on the land, the lions, tigers, big cats, wolves, bears, things like that, they eat things that nobody else eats. And they very often control the populations of those prey species that they eat. And if you remove them, their prey species grow in number. Not only grow in number, but sometimes they change their behavior because they don't have to worry about predators. So we know we've taken out most of the terrestrial big predators, that we've seen all kinds of unintended consequences from doing that. So the next time you're on Long Island, you get bit by a tick, it's because there's so many deer around, there's so many ticks living on those deer because the density of deer is really high because they have no predators. And so in the ocean, we don't really know what happens when you take out all the predators because we don't get to see it every day because it's a concealing environment. But we know if it's anything like the land, which I'm sure it is, you take out the top predators and things will change. The numbers of their prey species will grow, their behavior will change, and it'll cause all sorts of problems.
Now, of the approximately 500 species of shark on the planet, how many are endangered at the moment?
It's around about 25 to 30% of species are in pretty serious trouble.
Which is a very high percentage.
Yeah, it's one of the highest for any sort of, higher taxa is a pretty high percentage.
And why are they endangered?
Really, the main reason is that in the 1980s, the Chinese economy opened up and started to grow. And thousands of years before that, they invented a dish in southern China called shark fin soup. And shark fin soup is a luxury dish. It used to be served to the emperor. It was a very, very big status thing.
It was really for the elite of China,
it was really for the elite.
Royalty.
And as their economy has grown, more and more people have the sort of disposable income that they can buy this dish. It fetches about $100 US a bowl. Like a little bowl like this is $100.
It seems such a mundane, almost trivial thing to have people's affinity for a certain kind of soup be responsible for wholesale destruction of species of a very majestic animal.
It's pretty crazy. I think it's just one of those things that people's incomes grow. They want to show everybody that they have money, and it's just the done thing is that if you have a special event like a wedding, a banquet, a business dinner, if you don't serve shark fin soup, it's almost like you're cheap and you're not showing your generosity, and so you're not a good host. So there's a lot of societal pressure to serve this dish.
Now, I understand, we talked about this, that the annual sales, let's say, the value of the shark fin soup trade annually is $1 billion approximately.
It's
$1 billion.
It's definitely in that ballpark. It's one of the most expensive seafood products you can get. So I've seen fins in the market in Hong Kong on sale, just one set of fins for $3,000 US.
Now, there are, depending on the year, there can be 100 million sharks slaughtered, killed, caught. There can be more.
Yeah, so
Tremendous number.
We don't really have a good handle on the numbers. Some colleagues and I sort of got together in a bar and figured out what we thought roughly what it would be based on all the data we could muster together. And we got the absolute basement, the absolute lowest number to account for that sort of tonnage of sharks that's brought in is 50 million individuals, and the top was 273 million, and the median was 100 million. So we say 100 million.
Now, we know the Chinese are consuming them, but who's catching them and selling them?
Well, everybody else. Everybody else. Everybody that has a coastline, a long line fleet that can go out beyond their borders. It's more than 100 nations are fishing for sharks. And actually, to be honest, the meat of these sharks is being consumed in many of these countries. So it's not just China consuming, but China's providing the most expensive product and most of the demand for this product. And I think if that demand wasn't there, people wouldn't fish for sharks nearly as much. They certainly didn't before this demand for shark fin soup began.
What are some of the countries that are the most active fishermen for sharks around the world?
So the top nation is Indonesia. So right in the heart of the Coral Triangle, where you have a lot of biodiversity, they're fishing for sharks like you wouldn't believe. They land huge volumes. Japan, Taiwan, and Spain, they're not fishing in their own waters. They're sending out their fishing fleets to the pelagic zone. They're looking for tuna.
To what zone is that?
The open ocean, So they go everywhere. They buy licenses to go fish in the waters of Pacific Island nations and Caribbean nations, because those nations, they don't have the fishing capacity to do it. And they're going after tuna. And so they set these big long lines, miles and miles of lines with baited hooks. And of course, tuna's not the only thing that bites these hooks, it's sharks. And when they realized they could sell the fins, they would usually just bring the shark up, cut the fins off, and dump the body, because the meat was not worth putting in the freezer, because it just wasn't worth. You'd want the freezer space for tuna, because you can just take the fins off the shark and you can just dry them on the deck, and they're good to go. They can be exported just like that.
You describe this whole global scene in fishing as kind of like the Wild West. Is there any law and order? Is there a sheriff in town who's keeping an eye on what's going on aside from you?
No. Well,
in terms of international governance,
Wild West show is a good way to describe it. It's really been a complete and utter free-for-all. There's been basically no regulation for many, many years, as long as it's been going on. That is starting to change now, which is good.
There is a global, I don't know whether it's a treaty or there is some sort of global arrangement which attempts to regulate the capture of all sorts of endangered species, whether it's elephant tusks or sharks or other things. How is that affecting the shark trade right now?
So it's actually a bit of a game changer. So this treaty you're referring to is called the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. It was set up to regulate the trade in really mainly terrestrial animals. It wasn't really used very much for marine animals. And it was really something that it was very difficult to get the nations that are party to this treaty to get on board with putting a marine animal like a shark on this treaty. It took a lot of time. It took nearly a decade to get sharks listed. And actually in the last 2 years, we've seen it doesn't sound like a lot, 5 species of shark protected under this treaty.
So even though there may be 20 species, or more which are becoming endangered, threatened with extinction, being caught for soup. 5 are now being covered.
There was 3 on there previously, white whale and basking shark, but they are not really traded in large volumes. They're big sharks. They're protected by national laws. They're actually pretty well protected. But these 5 species, the Oceanic Whitetip, the scalloped hammerhead, the smooth hammerhead, the great hammerhead, and the porbeagle, these were traded in large volumes. And this treaty is kind of a bizarre thing, how we do it. We don't sit down with the scientists and say which species need to be on this treaty. Every country that's a party basically gets 1 vote, and they meet every 2-3 years and decide what goes on. And one or more countries has to actually propose a species, and they have to make a brilliant scientific case for it. But then it requires 2/3 of the countries to vote yes for something. So it's really, really hard to get something listed on CITES because of this 2/3 majority. And of course, there's a lot of countries that don't want the shark fin trade regulated. Some of the ones I just mentioned.
Because it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. They don't want it regulated. They want nobody looking. So they come to the meeting and they have guys with suitcases full of money and they bribe other small countries because every country has 1 vote and they just block it. So they blocked sharks for a long time, but at the last meeting in Thailand, we actually managed to get a few votes more than 2/3, and now the world has changed because now we have to control the trade of these particular species.
Now, before we talk about what you and your wife and partner, Deborah Abercrombie, are doing about this on many levels around the world in many ways, high tech, low tech, everything in between, we talked earlier about something that became a very influential experience for you when you were in Hong Kong, when you were walking through a market and just really saw what the trade is out there. Can you describe that scene and what was going through your head?
Yeah, so I've studied sharks for nearly 20 years, and I've seen a lot of sharks. I've swam with them, I've tagged them.
You've been bitten
3 times like an idiot. They're all small. They're the worst, most pathetic scars you've ever seen. My dog bite scars are worse. But anyway, so I've seen lots of sharks. I went to Hong Kong for the first time, and I walked in this one district, Shan Wan, where the dried seafood dealers are. And you can walk in the streets there for 30, 40 minutes, and every shop you look in is exactly the same. It's packed to the gills with shark fins, absolutely packed. Sea cucumber, fish, swim bladders, all kinds of dried seafood. The smell is overpowering, but when you look and you count, and you go, oh my God, look at this. In that 45 minutes, I saw more sharks, or bits of sharks, than I did in that 45 minutes that I did in 20 years out in the ocean looking at sharks. And I was physically, by the end of the day, it might have been the bad dim sum, but at the end of the day, I had to go back and lay down in the hotel. I was physically, it physically affected me to see all that. And then we were actually on our way to the CITES meeting. And so I was physically affected, and then I got really pissed off, and then we really got into the CITES meeting and won there. We'll talk about that later.
Well, I don't want to get you sick, and I don't want to piss you off, but before we move on, I think it would be beneficial to look at what we're talking about, and also to explain how this becomes a delicacy in China that is threatening species after species. So we could start with this, and then we're going to pass them around.
All right.
So people can take a look. And this, I think, helps explain what part of this fin actually becomes the soup. Could you explain how they make shark fin soup?
Well, let's start with this,
Okay.
actually.
All right.
So I think everyone would recognize this is a shark fin, right? This is the dorsal fin. So if you're at the beach and you turn around and you see this,
Go the other way.
swim towards it. Swim towards it. So just so you know, sharks, if you flip them over, they actually go to sleep. So that's what I use when I tag them. I flip them over.
So swim toward it
So
and
swim
flip it over.
towards it.
Done.
Grab the fins and flip it over. You're good to go. All right. So this is a dorsal fin. So this is what they get. They cut this off the shark and they dry it in the sun. So it's not usually that hard, but this is what it looks like. So this is what goes from the fishing nations to Hong Kong. So the Hong Kong, there's a lot of fin importers, China fin importers, they get this.
Hundreds of tons.
Yeah, 6,000 tons a year into Hong Kong of fin, and this is light. I'm not that strong. This is light. So imagine 6,000 tons of this stuff. This comes in. The importers, they then take all the skin off. They soak it in water. They scrub all the skin off. You might be able to see there's cartilage, like in your ear, right here. They pull all that stuff out, and then they actually dip it in chemicals, bleach, something like that, and you end up with this. This is what I saw in the shops. And so they dip it in bleach so it gets this yellow gold color. And I asked a friend of mine from China, why is it important to bleach it? And he says it's because in China, the color gold is good fortune. And I said, if you eat something that's dipped in bleach, that's not exactly good fortune. So this is what you buy in the shop. And what the chef actually does, you can see this is there's all these fibers here. And these fibers, they'll take this and they'll rehydrate this, and that's what becomes the noodles in the soup. And these things, they
So it
don't
kind of looks
taste
like ramen noodles.
Yeah,
in
it's
a
like
soup.
ramen noodles, but it's $100. So I never pay that for ramen noodles.
Right.
But so this, it adds a texture to the soup. It doesn't add any taste. But in Chinese cuisine, texture is very important. Texture is more important than taste. So that's why they like it. And it's just seasoned by, and it tastes like whatever you season with.
Now you said there is a sort of a slight glimmer of hope, not really hope, because there is starting to be a manufacturing production of artificial shark fin.
So there's
noodles.
artificial shark fin, there's vegan shark fin. Actually, the
Gluten-free shark fin, whatever.
Yeah, right. So the consumers are actually rebelling against it because they don't want to pay top dollar for something that's artificial. They want to pay top dollar for the real thing. So it's actually sort of, the funny thing is that the fact that this artificial product exists is actually driving down demand for shark fin because the consumers are assuming they're being ripped off. So it's working sort of not quite the way that it was expected, but it is sort of helping reduce demand.
So going back to this is one of the endangered species.
Yes.
A fin now tell us about this particular species.
So this is a great hammerhead. So this is, I think everybody probably knows what a hammerhead shark is.
Pass it around.
And these
This was the big
big
head.
wide head. This is the biggest of them. These sharks grow to 20 feet in length, so they're very big. I've seen one that was 16 feet, and it ate a spotted eagle ray right in front of me. So this one was only about 7 feet, so not that big, not even mature at this point. So
Sharks grow very slowly.
very slowly, yeah. So
Which is why they can't be replaced, or they don't replace the population quite that easily.
yeah, so there's, I actually started working on sharks in the Bahamas in an island called Bimini, and we actually catch sharks in the lagoon there, little babies, newborns, and we put tags in them. And one of the things we did over many years was learn when they come back to reproduce themselves. And it actually took we tagged them as babies in 1996, and it wasn't until 2008 they actually came back. And the way I illustrate that is when I tagged these baby sharks, Bill Clinton was the president. And then we had George Bush twice and Barack Obama. And when Barack Obama was president, the sharks came back to give birth. I don't know if there's a connection there.
Here, let's pass this over here. We can pass that down.
That guy's worth about $500. So
Be careful, Jim in. We're not insured.
If you look at most shark fins, they're sort of short and broad, like this. You see how that one's tall and narrow? Hammerheads have very tall and narrow fins. And they're actually super valuable because they produce very fine needles and fine noodles in the soup. So they're the most expensive ones.
Now, this one has a distinctive appearance because on the top is this mottled, light-colored
Yeah, so
blotch, kind of.
So this is the fin of an Oceanic Whitetip. So this is another, so the hammerhead is actually listed under CITES. So it's one of the endangered species. And this is an Oceanic Whitetip. This is another one that's listed. And these ones have incredibly distinctive fins. See how round it is? You see most of these guys are pretty triangular. The Chinese name for this is actually, I'm not going to say the Chinese name, but it translates to rolling ball because it's round, and you can see this giant white patch on it. So it's really, really distinctive.
Now, one of the many things that you and Deborah do is travel around the world, working with customs officials in ports and airports and ports of entry all around the world, teaching them how to recognize visually different kinds of shark fins so they can recognize the endangered species and stop them before they come in.
Yeah.
So how does that work, and who hires you, and how effective has it been?
Nobody hires us, we just get nobody wants to pay for that.
Oh, okay, so you do it free of charge.
No, there's rich guys that put out money for us to go do it, so it's good to go.
All right, well, then they pay you.
So let me take you a step back. If something's listed on CITES, it means that if you want to trade this across an international boundary, you have to have a permit issued by the country of origin. And that permit says that it was legally harvested, it was sustainably harvested, there's some management plan. So basically, if this fin is crossing a border, it needs to have some documentation, right? And that documentation is not easy to get because it's very difficult. In fact, with oceanic whitetips, there's no fishery in the world that's sustainable for this species. This species is critically endangered. So there's no way that any government will issue a permit for these things. So of course, for CITES to work, the guys who are at the border have to be able to recognize this fin is okay. This is a tiger shark. It's not on CITES. This is all right. But this one is not all right. This one needs a permit. So the biggest obstacle to stopping sharks getting on CITES was the opponents of listing said, well, all shark fins look alike. So even if we put them on CITES, the border control people aren't going to be able to do anything because they won't recognize this fin from this fin. And I was actually, I was not, the very last meeting before we were successful, I was Skyped in and I heard the Japanese delegate saying, well, it's impossible to tell them apart. And I was screaming, I mean, look at that. This has a big bloody white patch and it's round. I mean, this is obvious. This is the most obvious fin you've ever seen in the world. So basically, they convinced everybody that you couldn't identify these fins, which is utter crap. You can obviously identify this. So basically, yeah, we now that they're on CITES, we travel around and we meet with the actual people on the border, and we say, look, it's round and it's got a white patch, and that's basically it. That's what I do. Millionaire guy funds me to go to China and tell them, yeah, it's round. You know, point out the obvious, but sometimes people have to point out the obvious.
But you do a lot that is not particularly obvious, and one of the things you do is you have explored and begun to identify shark fins not through a visual observation, but really through genetic.
The really cool thing about the DNA is that I can actually tell where it comes from. So female sharks are like sea turtles and salmon. They home back to their birthplace to breed. They do that over generations. Little differences in the DNA start to crop up. So this one is from the Indian Ocean. So I can tell it's an oceanic whitetip by looking at it, but then by sequencing the DNA, I can actually tell where in the world it came from, which is really important because in some places they're protected, some places they're not. And we can actually track over time which countries are not implementing CITES properly. Some countries will not implement it properly. We know they won't. Some will, some won't. But we can bring accountability because we can the border control can catch these fins at the border. Then we can DNA test and say, all right, it came from here, and we know these countries are fishing here, and we can point fingers and say, you're not implementing CITES properly. And CITES is pretty unique, and that's the reason it's a good treaty, is because if countries don't implement it properly, all the other countries can sanction them and stop all wildlife trade to that country. So it's a treaty that really has teeth. So I think it's going to be a real game changer.
Now you also literally follow the sharks, and one of the ways you do that is with this little gizmo. So tell us, you tag them, you locate them through satellite technology. Tell us about that.
So this is a pop-off satellite archival tag. manufactured by microwave telemetry. So, it doesn't look like much. This thing cost $5,000. They give them to me for free, so that's all right. So this dart right here goes actually at the base of the shark's fin. So there's just cartilage in there, and it just sticks in there, and this trails. So we catch the shark, we put this thing into it. What actually happens is the shark carries this around for a while, and the electronics in here record light, depth, and temperature. And it just records, it doesn't transmit anything, but we program it after 6, 9, or 12 months. It actually, the electronics will send a signal right here that actually causes, there's a little wire right here, it puts a current through that, and that causes it to corrode. And basically we put down what time, what date we want that to happen, and within a few hours this will actually break off. So this will just break off the shark, and this float will float to the surface, and it'll start transmitting through this. And a satellite picks that up, and basically we get an email. It tells us where this is in the ocean. It'll float around, and it'll tell us the light, temperature, and depth for the whole period of the deployment. Basically, from the light, we can figure out time of sunrise, sunset, et cetera, et cetera. We figure out roughly where it was. So we can reconstruct a track and learn where they go. So we've put 90 of these out on Oceanic Whitetips in the Bahamas, and we find that they leave the Bahamas. One of them swam as far as Brazil from the Bahamas in about 2 or 3 months. Some of them swim up to Bermuda. So they make these big long migrations, but what's pretty cool is they always come back. They come right back to the very spot where we tag them in the Bahamas. Who knows? These sharks live in the blue water where there's nothing. It's just blue. I don't know how they do it, but it's kind of amazing that this shark can go from Bahamas to Brazil and then find its way back to the exact spot. And then I catch it again and put another tag on it.
Well, shark technology has really changed the life of sharks, both what we know about them and it's made them safer, and it's imperiled them more simultaneously.
Oh,
we can fish
absolutely.
in places that we didn't used to fish.
Yeah.
We can go deeper, but yet we can also keep track of them, right?
Well, the same is true for all fish. There's just nowhere left to hide on Earth because technology is so good, right? We have GPS, we have weather forecasting, so boats can go out and not worry about weather. You can pretty much fish any spot on Earth because of all of this technology, and the boats can go far. They have big freezers on them. I mean, technology has really been the enemy of the fish and the sharks too, because there's nowhere left for them to hide. We have technology, we can fish them at 3,000, 4,000 feet and bring them up.
But technology is also allowing you to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think for fish and sharks too, technology is what's gonna save them. Our technology is gonna save the fish, in the sense that I sort of envision within the next 5 or 10 years, all fishing boats are going to be tracked by satellite. We're going to know exactly where every fishing boat on Earth is, and we're going to know what they're doing because there's going to be cameras on these fishing boats, so we can see exactly what they're pulling up.
And you can detect the patterns that they're making.
Yeah, you know what they're doing based on their track. You can actually see if they're fishing a certain way, you know that they're on this seamount and they must be setting a long line because of the way they're, if they're just moving, they're just steaming across. So I see sort of these Pacific Island nations that are selling the rights to fish in their waters to developed nations. And they have no way of knowing what these fishing boats are doing. There's going to be a command center there, and they're going to be tracking this boat, and they're going to say, well, this boat didn't have a permit to fish in our waters. And that boat might not even land in that country. It might land somewhere else, but the command center of that country is going to go, right, well, it's going to come into port, and they're going to go in. But maybe that boat's offloaded everything to another boat, and it's so nobody knows. Well, guess what? We can go into the freezer of that boat. We can take a bucket of water, and we can use DNA, and we can figure out from DNA what fish were in that freezer. And if they haven't offloaded, the Pacific Island guys, for example, will come out and they'll have on their phone our iPhone app telling them which sharks are legal and which ones won't, and they'll just go and they'll identify the fins of the protected species. So it used to be that fish couldn't hide. But now the fishermen are not going to be able to hide. That's my prediction.
There may be some advantages to lack of privacy.
Yeah.
There's a microphone here, so you have a question, go to the mic.
Let me ask you a question about sharks in terms of climate change and the sense that I swam in Cape Cod, and for the past 2 summers, beaches have been closed all across Cape Cod because of sharks, and they're following seals. So as the oceans change and the seals migrate, the sharks follow them. So A, what's the impact of some of this climate change on sharks? And 2, if you were on Cape Cod and had to deal with this problem, what would you do?
So this is the great whites that have become
Chasing the seals, closing the beaches, creating panic.
So they're not creating the panic. It's us that's creating the panic.
Well, it depends on your perspective.
So let me tell you what basically has happened. It's not necessarily climate change. We've protected both seals and white sharks. So the seal population has grown, but the white shark population has also grown. So we're restoring what was naturally there. And so unfortunately, by restoring what's naturally there, there's now some risk to swimmers that a white shark attack might happen. However, they're probably not fully restored. There was lots and lots of white sharks there decades previously, and we've never had a really big shark attack problem, despite what Jaws would say, in the Northeast. I mean, they live there. It's their home. If you swim, there's no guarantees. If you want to swim and you don't want any risk of shark attack, I suggest a bathtub, a pool. Oh, no, I should say, the true and tried method of reducing the probability of shark attack by at least 50%, always swim with somebody else.
And number 2, make sure it's a slower swimmer.
Yeah.
Which endangered sharks do you think should be on the treaty, and do you think the right sharks are on the treaty?
I absolutely think the right sharks are on the treaty. We need more, and we will be going for more in the next meeting, which is in Cape Town in 2016. I think the species that should get on next are thresher sharks, the ones with the big giant tails. They're in serious trouble, and I believe we will get them on. I think there's a lot of rays, which are relatives of sharks, that are sort of not as high profile. I think they'll get on, and I think there's a whole lot of other fairly obscure looking sharks that nobody knows about that should be on, that won't get on anytime soon because they're not high profile enough yet.
Hi, 2 questions. I was wondering if you could clarify some of the life history traits of the sharks, like how long do they live, and are they giving birth once a year or every other year? Like how hard is it for these populations to bounce back if they ever are given the chance to?
So many of them, it takes close to a decade for the female to mature. Some of them, it takes 20 or 30 years for the female to mature. A lot of them, especially the big species, they give birth every 2 to 3 years. They don't give birth every year, it's every 2 to 3. And they have a small number of offspring, so maybe, probably 6 to a dozen is pretty normal. And of course they're pretty small, and a lot of them die just because they get eaten by other sharks and stuff like that. So I think it's something on the order of, for most sharks, every year they could withstand maybe 2 or 3, 4% of the population being removed. And they could sort of make up for that. So 2, 3, 4%, very, very thin margin. So whenever you have a shark fishery, you have to control the catch, so it's just this much, and it's almost impossible. It's very hard. In the US, we're able to do it. In Australia, they do it. New Zealand, we do it because they spend a lot of money on science and a lot of money on enforcement and controlling the catch. Most countries just don't have the capacity to be able to fish them like that. But small sharks, some of the smaller ones, they can actually take a 5 to 10% hit per year. They mature in 2 or 3 years and they reproduce every year. So those ones are ones you should focus fishing on because they can withstand some pressure.
Well, please join me in thanking Dr. Chapman for an absolutely fascinating, and we're We're lucky, and the sharks are lucky to have humans like Dr. Chapman around, because what he is doing and his extraordinary knowledge of what lurks beneath is really going to help save the planet. So thanks to him, thanks to the Stony Brook Yacht Club, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you again soon.